Thank you, councillors. We have no apologies, but we have Councillor Winters and Councillor Eatey on Zoom. Agenda item number 3, public forum. There is no public forum being requested. I have to advise you that the summer experience program presentation has been deferred to the next council meeting when there is more time available, rather than rush the presentation today. Agenda item 4, items not on the agenda. There have been none received today. Are there any councillors who want anything discussed in general business? Please advise now. Order or not. Order of business, there's no change to the order of business. However, despite us trying really hard, the recommendation on the adoption of the draft consultation document, which is agenda item 9.6, will be deferred until Thursday's 8 a.m. Zoom. We have been unable to get Audit New Zealand to complete and make a recommendation and sign off that document before today. Declaration of conflicts of interest. Any declarations of conflict of interest in terms of today's agenda? There is not. Public excluded business to be transferred into open. There is none. We'll move straight through to the Regional Council minutes of the 17th of December. I'll move they be in true correct record of that meeting. Seconded, Mr. Rose. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising? Councillor Rose.
Just wanted to go to page 16 where 7.2, obviously someone wrote resolved and not the actual decisions required. Just thought that should be corrected. Page 16.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll amend that. No other matters arising? If not, can we go through to the Chair's report? And I'll move the Chair's report be adopted. Seconder, Councillor White. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any matters in the Chair's report councillors would like any further expansion on? Councillor Neese.
Not expansion, but just a note that there was the launch of the Bay Conservation Cadets at Oroki. As a constituency councillor, I would have liked to have been considered for inclusion in that invitation. And I think this is happening quite often, where somebody somewhere in council is setting up an event and doesn't actually think of who might have an interest within council of being invited. So I just ask that staff consider that and make sure that constituency councillors are aware of any official matters or events that are occurring within the constituency, please.
Thank you, Councillor Neese. I'm not too sure what the notice for that was. Pretty short notice, I would think, but your point's noted.
Oh yes, and good morning, councillors. On that particular one, we weren't responsible for the invites. It's very difficult, and we do go back and ask if we can have our constituency councillors attend, and we're reliant on the host to allow that to happen. And we will try harder, because I think the regional council, sometimes given the makeup of our councillors, we can argue a good case for having more than one representative from the regional council. So I do recall on that one, it was the host that limited the invites.
It's internal meetings as well, Mr. Chair, that I've been a bit grumpy about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Neese. That moves us to agenda item 9.2, which is additions to the engineering services panel contract. This should be pretty straightforward. The recommendations in 2.2. Mr. Engel, anything to add?
Nothing to add. Take it as read, please, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brunning. It's moved Councillor Brunning, seconded Councillor Rose. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Rivers and Drainage and Lakes 2021 Capital Works Procurement Plan on page 37. Mr. Engel?
Yeah, This is a little similar in terms of it's a fine tuning of the capital plan that was presented last year. There is one project that is being held up by, ironically, our success in delivering the floodway works, 6C, 6A, 6B and 6C of the floodway means that there is a material shortage. So we're suggesting we go ahead with the flood wall upgrade instead, which is just on the other side of the river, of the same river. This has been put past the advisory group members. We've had 7 responses, all have been supportive of it. Both jobs will go ahead, it's just changing the order.
Thank you.
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
Moved Councillor Von Duddleton. Seconded Councillor Brunning. By way of discussion, Ms. Dingle, could I just clarify when you use the term stock bank material availability? That's that's a big go. I mean, you're talking about soft fill, you're talking about rocks, or what?
No, it's not the rock, it's the what you might term as overburden material, which ironically was in ample supply not long ago, but because we're using so much, but the sheer volume of what we're using creates a shortfall. So ironically, with the quarry involved now wants us to use more of the larger rock so that they can make more material available.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Any further questions? If not, the recommendation to be moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. 9.4, to a minor climate change statement.
Thank you, councillors. This has obviously been on the table a couple of times, and hopefully the report is such that it's self-explanatory in terms of we now want to finalise the climate change statement to the extent that we can now put it into the long-term plan consultation document for further consultation for the public. Now, I understand we have had feedback from Councillor Nees, who's suggested a couple of extra bullet points be added to this final section. I've had no other feedback from other councillors, unless, correct me if I'm wrong there. But yeah, we were seeking a decision today to, if you want to add anything to it or take anything away from it, now is your chance to discuss that. Laverne's just got a diagram there showing where we are at the stage. We obviously declared the climate emergency, prepared a climate action plan. This year or last year, we put together the climate change program. So there's, I think, 24 different actions that we're working on. Now we're at the stage now of finalising the draft version of the climate change statement for the LTP.
Thank you, Mr. Ingle. Laverne, can you just clarify that at the moment we're awaiting sign-off on the consultation document from Audit New Zealand. In terms of any changes to do with this document today, they would be minor and therefore wouldn't need to go to audit sign-off?
Agreed, yes, that is what's been agreed with Audit New Zealand at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nees.
Sorry, councillors. The 2 points that I have suggested we add, I suggest added to the bottom section, Toimoa and Revaluation Regional Council's approach. We will. And I'd like to have 2 new bullet points in recognition of, one, the fact that we have a declaration of an emergency, and 2, that we highlighted the need to raise awareness in the community. So my 2 suggested bullet points are: 1, act proactively and with urgency to address climate change risks, and 2, raise awareness of climate change and its anticipated impacts, and show leadership in climate change action response. So I don't think they're inconsistent with the direction that we're heading in, but I do believe there are gaps in the statement.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. Councillors happy with those suggested? Councillor Von Duddleton.
Happy with that, but I would like to just add a couple of words to the second one, using a science-based approach.
I don't think Councillor Nees would have an issue with that. Anything else, councillors? Councillor Thompson?
You know, I fully support those changes. I just wonder whether we could add under transformational shifts under number 6. We've got there significant investment occurs in natural carbon storage, including planting native trees. Anybody have an objection to adding and wetlands?
So,
Including planting native trees and preserving and or creating wetlands. Thank you, Councillor Love.
thank you, Councillor Thompson. Could I just, before I come to Councillor McDonald, Laverne, just conscious of the statements that came out of the Rod Carr Commission report, which to some degree put a different perspective on plantation forests as opposed to the replanting of natives. Are we aware of that when we make a statement here, significant investment occurs in natural carbon storage? Because historically it has been more planting of pine trees, as opposed to now, which I think is a focus to shifting towards native, which are much slower, but I think they're enduring, and you don't cut them down and then do something else with the wood.
Sorry, could you repeat the question there?
I can probably answer that. I think Dr. Carr made the comment that you can't plant your way out of this. Now, while that's true, I think this is just number 6 out of 6 actions, so it's 1/6 of the effort. So I think planting is still part of our toolbox, if you like, but it's not the only thing in our toolbox. So I guess we can ask Dr. Carr on that next time we catch up with him, but I would have thought that he'd agree it's still a useful tool to have, and particularly if you add wetlands to it, because I've heard information that the estuarine wetlands in particular are very good at fixing and storing carbon.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald.
Look, I'm mindful that I'm mindful that climate change is going to be a huge issue for Tiwi Māori across the water. So I would like to suggest that the second clause in 3.3 be moved across as one of the recommendations.
So where are we, Councillor McDonald? Can you?
If we go to 3.3 of the report.
Implications for Māori?
Yes. And move that clause, the second clause, into the recommendations. Because I am aware that, you know, there is traction being gained through a movement, or if I cannot call it a movement, to press for a greater involvement of iwi Māori in their climate change space. So I just want us that to be recognised and moved across to our recommendations, that we track with that as well.
So you're suggesting we take that clause and add it to?
And reiterate it in the recommendations, or just move to their effect.
Through you, Chair, just to clarify, you're asking for an additional recommendation to this paper that says, note, the climate change statement will inform and guide how we work in partnership with Māori and support conversations around the regional climate change challenges. Yes. So it wouldn't be in the position statement, it would be a recommendation that the council resolves. Yes. Staff would support that recommendation.
Councillor White.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to support that. And I think when we mention the word science, whether backed up with science, that in the same breath, Mātauranga Māori should be included in that space. I'm very much aware, for example, in Te Aroha, that they've already got a Te Aroha climate change plan. So they've already activated that. So I think it's really, really important that we'll not so much align, but we investigate and connect with that thinking in that space. Where they're a bit ahead of us at the moment in mobilising that space, so it just pays to take cognizance of those sorts of developments as well.
Okay, thank you, councillors. So we've got a recommendation supported by staff that the second paragraph on page 51, climate change statement, etc., will become part of the regional climate change, Toi Moana climate change statement to go out for consultation You happy to move the resolution? We understand what we're voting for. Councillor Nees, clear?
Yes.
Can we just be clear where it's going? So is it going to be inserted in, as part of the second paragraph in that statement?
I think we can probably leave that up to staff. Chief
So
Executive.
through you, Chair, I understood what was proposed was it would be an additional recommendation to the paper. So noting recommendation to the paper, it wouldn't be included in the position statement. So it would be highlighted as part of the resolutions that the council notes that the climate change statement will inform and guide how we work in partnership with Māori, etc. That was, I think, the intent of the proposition.
Yeah,
Councillor Rose and then Councillor Crosby.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had, I had another piece to add on top of the two recommendations that Councillor Nees has got. But also I just wanted to ask a question just to clarify. So this is the draft and the final statement will be done after we've consulted with the public. Okay, so that's clarifying that. And the additional one I wanted to add, let me pick it up. I just wanted to add, continue to support our communities in the transition process to combat climate change, or something similar to that. It can be reworded if need be, but I just think we need to include something in regards to showing that kind of, oh God, where am I? Just like explaining the transition process pretty much, and actually getting our communities involved within the transition process and recognising that.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. My understanding is you moved the recommendations, and what you've just spoken to, do you not think it could essentially sit within our objectives, bullet point 2 of the recommendation, of the climate change statement, sorry? Which is community awareness. You happy with that? Okay. So we've had the recommendation moved by Councillor Crosby.
I think if I just reflecting on Councillor McDonald's recommendation, which I support, the trouble is no one reads the report, but they will read the statement. And while we do have a commentary in the last section around valuing Mātauranga and Te Ao Māori, it doesn't integrate the partnership approach, which I think you're talking about. So I'd also suggest a tweak in the statement around that partnership approach.
We could add work collaboratively, including.
Just an extension of that third bullet point in the last section, I think. Reflecting that in the statement, not necessarily in the report and recommendations, because it's the statement that will be made public, not the report or the recommendations.
So you happy to capture those comments, Vern?
Yes.
I don't think they make a material difference to the adoption for consultation. Okay, it's been moved. Councillor Rose, have we have a second? Sorry? Councillor Nees, any further discussion? If not, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 9.5, adoption of statement proposal fees and charges.
Thank you, Chairman. This statement of proposal of fees and charges has been workshopped last year and adopted as a supporting document for a long-term plan. The auditors have completed the audit of this to ensure that fees and charges, the revenue, the resourcing are all consistent. We therefore propose that the next stage is to release this for public consultation to inform your decisions about whether to actually increase these fees and charges with effect 1st of July.
Thank you. Mr. McCall, any questions? I've got one to start, just nickel and diming. How many piggeries do we have in the Bay of Plenty?
I would have to look it up.
I don't think we've got any. Okay, councillors. Councillor Neves, and then councillor Von Dunnison. Oh, see. Okay, councillor Neves.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I provided Mr. Taylor with some corrections earlier on today, and I just wonder if they've been picked up, please.
Please, Chairman, I will incorporate those changes.
So just for your information, for example, there's on page 116, with regard to the court charges, that statement is incomplete and it should read $17.65 per 100 gross tonnage or part thereof. The way it is at the moment, it reads as if it's per ship, $17.65 per ship. So just little things like that, I think we need to make sure that it's correct. And I didn't find some of the text readable, so I'll pass that through to staff.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, councillors? Councillor Thompson?
Could I just seek some help, please? Somewhere in my reading, I've come across suggested amendments to consenting inspections, the number of times per year or every 5. Where is that? I wasn't dreaming it, was I?
So that is correct. There are a number of changes to the consenting categories and to the inspection frequencies. Those are detailed in the statement of proposal on approximately page 64 of your agenda pack.
Just bear with me because I did have some issues, or have I missed the boat totally? Oh, far too easy, David. Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman, sorry to be holding everybody up, but if we just look at that page and we look at the air discharge large industry, the current frequency is 3 monthly and we're proposing 6 monthly. Now, I'm unclear how that fits really with our policy direction, which is to be vigilant with regards to air quality across our region. So, and there are other examples in here, so I'm just wondering,
I think, councillor, it's probably relative to risk. So when you look at small industry's actually gone down from 3 yearly to 2 yearly. I don't know, I'll seek explanation from staff. Mark or...
So all the changed frequencies are have been worked through with the compliance team. They're proposed by them based on inspections they do and the number of exceedances they have in the risk profile. So while there are a few industries that have had a lot of emissions and those are closely monitored, in general, most large industries are compliant with their consent conditions.
So essentially, this is a recommendation in terms of frequency from compliance.
Yes.
Okay.
I struggle to say, for example, in industrial discharges, we're currently doing it 3 monthly, we're proposing 6 monthly. Is there a difference in terms of the quality of that monitoring, that we're going to be doing it much bigger and better at 6 monthly? Some of it just, I'm struggling with the rationale, that was all. And the other thing I do want, as a general matter, I would like an assurance that in terms of our regulatory monitoring processes going forward, that we are all over the top of what's going to be required through Taumata Arawai. Because that to me is the big ball game in town in terms of water and wastewater monitoring going forward. I'll have to accept that staff have looked at this, but I just, it doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Von Dunnison.
Just so we do understand that, this is the the minimum requirement, not the maximum requirement. So it's at least 6 monthly. That doesn't mean to, am I getting that right? That doesn't mean to say if we have an issue somewhere that staff won't.
That is correct. So that is a minimum requirement. If any exceedances are found in non-compliance, they can increase the frequency around those particular issues and pass on actual and reasonable charges in those cases, or respond to any complaints.
Thank you, Mr. LeComte. Councillor Nees.
So thank you. Just with respect to that, I don't see why we can't leave in as required or 5 yearly for some of the major issues like industrial abstraction, major and municipal abstraction, major, we've got as required or 5 yearly, and we're saying let's just make it 5 yearly. If it is as required, that we can go earlier if we want, why would we not have it in there? Or is it because you do something with the charging mechanism?
So that is setting a minimum requirement. So if it was set a minimum was as required, there would in fact be no compulsion to check them at least 5 yearly. So that's part of some of the legal advice we've received, that we should have a time period specified for everything, and as required is in fact applies across everything else if there is compliance issues or complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Clon. Any further questions, councillors? Otherwise, we have a move and a second for adoption of fees and charges. I'll move. Seconded, Councillor Thurston. No further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. I'll seek the direction of the Chief Executive here. So 9.6 is the adoption of the consultation document. I see we've got Siobhan here, but we can't adopt this till tomorrow. So if you want to give councillors the opportunity to ask questions of this prior to the formal sign-up tomorrow, or what?
No, through you, Chair, the auditor will come on Thursday morning to your Zoom meeting, and so that's when we will need to adjourn this item to that time. So our apologies, we've been working hard to get that opinion today, but it isn't quite there yet. So we adjourn that item till Thursday.
Mr. Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to let you know that our CEO has notified Matt and myself that the Auditor General is welcoming our feedback on the audit process, which we've just been through. And therefore I intend with Matt to work through that and provide probably a feedback statement, probably for your signature to go back as a result of this particular audit.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Leads us through, so councillors, just to be clear, a Zoom meeting at 8 a.m. on Thursday, at which the Auditor General Audit New Zealand, in terms of our nominee, will be making a presentation, and Siobhan will be there.
Yes.
Okay, 8 o'clock on Thursday. Councillor Nees.
Will we be able to make minor changes to the consultation document?
We essentially have, in terms of one of the previous, the climate change one.
Yeah.
So I think the issue will be, yes, if they're minor of nature.
So I've sent through to the Chief Executive and Matt some minor changes, which are just for readability and clarity of understanding. So I just want to make sure that they can be integrated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 9.7, Arataki Tuarua. Silent.
Good afternoon, councillors. Myself and Debbie are pleased to present to you the results for the second quarter of the current financial year. So I'll cover off the non-financial performance results, and I'll then hand over to Debbie to cover off in more detail the financial results. So for the 6 months through to 31st of December, 21 out of a total of 33 performance measures were on track. An additional 9 measures are still to be reported on because the reporting cycle is often synced once per year. And then there are 2 measures that were not on track to be achieved by the end of the financial year. The 2 measures that were not on track to be achieved by the end of the financial year relate to the replacement of non-compliant burners in the Rotorua airshed. Now, the reason for that is although performance has been reasonably strong through quarter 1 and 2, there's simply a significantly reduced stock of non-compliant burners left in that airshed, i.e. so many have been replaced over the last few years that basically we have saturated that market, and it's believed that more than 80% of non-compliant solid fuel burners in the airshed have already been removed or replaced, and as such it's unlikely as we go through to the end of the year that we'll have 200 burners replaced. Now this is a LTP bound measure, i.e. it expires at the end of the current financial year and does not extend into the subsequent long-term plan as it was a fixed term initiative. The second measure that is at risk for achievement by the end of the year is the number of passenger trips taken in the region. So passenger patronage through the first 2 quarters of the year is down, 8% down in quarter 2 from the same quarter last year. COVID-19 obviously had a huge impact on that through the first part of the year, and now with the subsequent effects of the recent knock-ons, it's going to have even more negative effects overall. Where we have seen some good improvements, however, is that Tauranga Schools has significantly increased in quarter 2, with an increase of about 90%, 88.5% to be precise. And so those are the 2 measures out of the 33 that are currently forecast to be at risk of achievement.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, question. Do you attribute the enhanced use of public transport by school students to the free fares?
I don't have sufficient information to know what the primary cause of that increase has been.
So through you, Chair, we saw a phenomenal increase in the school's patronage. I mean, we've gone from probably, with your approval, something like 25 buses up to around 50 plus services at the moment, and I've got Jessica Easton, our commercial manager, to give more context to that.
We've seen an increase again this year, so another 40% increase on this time last year, pre-COVID. So we're currently getting more buses because we're having capacity issues yet again.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Debbie?
So through you, Chair, if it's okay, I'll present at a high level the financial performance. Apologies we don't have our slideshow, but really just talking to section 2 of your agenda report, which again, apologies, it was sent out slightly later than planned while the team focused on the LTP. So again, the forecasting is still conservative for the 6 months to the 31st of December. Through the annual plan approvals, we've obviously committed a significant amount of reserve funding. So we were budgeting to help ease the rating impact in 2021. So we were budgeting an operating deficit of 12.9 million, and we're going to be just slightly higher than that at 14.5 million. Number of things impacting that. At this point, operating revenue, our full year forecast, is largely on target, but you'll see some unders and overs when I start talking to the variance analysis. Operating expenditure is looking to be approximately $1.5 million higher, and again, a number of considerations there. Our capital revenue will be largely on budget at around $19 million, which is $1 million higher than we had budgeted for, 18 million, and overall this total surplus will be around $5 million, so approximately $500,000 lower than we had planned. Capital expenditure, again, at this point, you have in your agenda papers around the rivers and drainage resilience projects funded by Crown Infrastructure Funding Partners. They're largely looking, with the excellent summer conditions and despite some rock supply shortage, they're still looking to deliver a reprioritised program this year. And the shortfall on full year forecast of approximately $5 million is largely attributed to project upgrade. You'll recall in December of last year, you received a full update on the program of works, noting that your decision to house the Group Emergency Coordination Centre within Regional House. And the timing on that will result in approximately $3 million underspend, which will be carried forward into the long-term plan budget. On the long-term plan budget, your papers have included a version of budget Any decisions that are made today around budgets that impact future years will be folded into the update of the budget over the intervening time before your deliberations in May. In terms of the specific operating revenue variances on page 18 of the late agenda, just drawing out the considerations around the Rotorua Te Aroha Lakes land use change incentives program. Obviously, the post-plan change 10 second stage appeals were resolved in December, but the ongoing impact of that is that we're continuing to forecast an underspend this year. The rephase program for land use change incentives have already been built into the budget, but unfortunately this year will deliver approximately 2.6 million underspend on the Lakes program, and you see that being reflected through the forecast lower than planned revenue from the MFE. Notwithstanding that we've got a significant amount of reserves from the MFE, so we don't really need to ask the MFE at this stage for further funding because we have saved their money for future expenditure. Finance revenue, consistent with our quarter one update, will continue to include a forecast higher revenue of $1 million, largely around subvention and some treasury revenue movement. Passenger transport, just drawing out the net effect, we are looking for higher revenue there. It is masking slightly lower than planned revenue around our fees and charges, but noting that the accelerated delivery of the Ritz, so we went fare free for the first couple of months in 2021, and that has had an impact, as has the COVID on the urban services predominantly. So as a result, PT will still end up higher on our budget at this point, but fares-wise, we'll be looking to look at the ongoing forecast of patronage and noting you are consulting on the fare policy for public transport as part of your LTP. Biosecurity, the higher than planned variance is more of a timing issue, and some noting small minor variance on corporate property, where we've realised some gains. That covers off predominantly our operating revenue. Operating expenditure of Rotorua Lakes. Also noting finance and corporate planning. It has a number of cost centres in there, but largely the 700,000 overspend, 400,000 of that is attributed to, we're forecasting approximately $1.9 million for rates commission this year, which is slightly higher than our budget. We also noting Council's earlier decision to establish a project to transition our rates collection into Council, and that will land ideally as part of LTP year 2. Emergency management, again, you'd increased your budgets for annual plan this year in the event that you had further expenditure associated with COVID-19. At this point, although things have changed ever so recently, we're still forecasting an underspend in emergency management, notwithstanding that any extra expenditure you have already approved for that to be funded from reserves that have sufficient reserves. Regional planning, we had a late invoice around our smart growth contributions, which hadn't been approved at the year end, and then a little bit of extra spend around the plan changes in respect of consultants and legal. Rivers and drainage, just noting the variance there, largely on budget with the more substantive operating budget, and I've talked to the capital expenditure variances. In respect of our treasury portfolio, we have some more information in depth and confidential, but I'll just highlight again, currently holding $289 million on the book as investments, noting 50 million of that represents on lending to Quayside, also noting $70 million of that is still LGFA funding that we've yet to spend. So we pre-fund our capital expenditure 2 years in advance, request the funding from LGFA. It increases our liquidity and enables us to be ready to spend depending on the delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Very comprehensive summary of the current position. So I'll lead off a question. Revaluation of rivers and drainage assets. I suppose that's not land and buildings, that's operating assets, is it?
Yes, so rivers and drainage revalue as at the 1st of July. We've obviously had quite a delayed external audit. and we've finally processed all of those adjustments, and there is about a 300,000 change that we needed to impair. But otherwise, I think the current valuation is something like 336 million for those assets as at 1 July 2020, and that's reflected in the updated infrastructure strategy before you with the draft long-term plan for consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chair of Risk and Assurance, I'd just like to make the comment that in my belief this report is accurate. It shows good financial management, and any of the issues which are detailed, which means we have variances, are adequately explained. I think the staff have done a great job in presenting the report. I'm satisfied with where we are at the moment and happy to move the recommendations after any further discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Love. So I've got Councillor Von Douglasson, Councillor Crosby and Councillor Nees. In that order.
Thank you. Debbie, just with regard to the valuation of river and drainage assets, that is a targeted rate to the landowners involved generally on a 80-20. So who owns the asset? Is that allocated on the same ratio as the targeted rate, or is it 100% owned by us, even though they're funding it?
The asset sits on our books in terms of the contribution we've made to those spatial areas. That particular asset sits on as an asset to us, and no doubt from a landowner perspective there is significant benefit attributed because of that protection.
So just to clarify, Debbie, the assets that historically belong to what was referred to as the Rangataiki Drainage Board don't accrue an 80-20 subsidy. They're owned by all that scheme.
Yes.
But they sit on our books in terms of the management of the financial profile.
Yes, they do, with 100% recovery, and obviously all expenditure is done through a proper planning process with the community for minor drainage.
Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thank you. As a bit of an observation, I do note that the Bancorp data is in public excluded, but yesterday when we were hearing from that gentleman, he articulated what I've heard by 4 economists over the last 6 months at least, is that they don't know what's going on. And I mean that sincerely. And one example was the projection for interest rates, which was going to go into the negative, anything up to 0.5%. Now it's trending the other way, and that gap is significant. House prices, they got that wrong, got just about everything wrong, because they've been relying on traditional conventions and trends, which is irrelevant in today's operating environment. And the reason I'm saying this is we head to LTP, we must acknowledge that what used to happen isn't happening and has not been happening over the last 6 months at least, and probably will not happen as we move forward. Therefore, we need to err on the side of conservatism, in my view, and be prepared for radical changes in markets that weren't as you traditionally project. That's what I'm trying to make. And I think we should bear that in mind while we are going relatively hard in many areas with our treasury management and finances and expectations, that we still need that little bit of conservatism and preparedness for radical change in the marketplace, which is happening. You know, the US stock market has defied trends for the last 6 months, as is ours, has the ANX. And I don't claim to be an expert in this, but when I listen to experts, the first thing they admit is they got it wrong. And you know, I just note that as a comment in terms of our trajectory as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. We'll see Councillor Nees.
Thank you. The regional planning variance due to the late smart growth invoice, how late was that invoice?
Specifically, it passed my desk in around November, December, and more recently in February.
So my question is that a failure or poor performance by town and city as the administrating organisation or us in our project management from our side?
Potentially it does sort of highlight, the agency, the council is obviously a bit late in their invoicing, but ordinarily we would have accrued that. So there was a little bit of control weakness there on my team's part as well.
Councillor Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me to draw a very long bow from this discussion to the LTP? I have two matters that I would like clarification on. In our Zoom yesterday, I referred to the figures in terms of transportation budgeting for the next 10 years that were in the Tauranga City Council paper, briefing paper to their commissioners, and a figure of $92.6 million was attributed to Bay of Plenty Regional Council funding over the next 10 years. Has that figure been confirmed as the joined up figure?
So through you, Chair, we're going back to ask how that figure was included in the briefing paper, because as you recall, at that briefing yesterday, the figure for public transport in Western Bay is over $300 million. So we're just wondering how that figure was come about, and we'll let you know. We're following up.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The other thing, a question to either you, Debbie, or Matt, is the issue of the equalisation reserve trajectory. Has that been changed since the LTP draft has come out?
So through you, Chair, we've just had a conversation with Audit New Zealand, and it's more likely that from years 4 to 7, the update in the EQ will show as 0, and we'll be looking to put the surplus through to the regional fund as directed by the CFO. So that's a table, and along with a number of others that will be placed. But at the moment, the financial strategy reflects the level of contingency that's been built in, and the mechanism, the how we've got there, which is obviously through the review of the financial framework review, and particular significant forecasting assumptions around dividends. So that's from a cosmetic perspective, or how the information will be presented is the change that we've made, but not in terms of the significant forecasting assumptions.
So for you, Mr. Chair, can I just add to that? So the comment in our financial strategy is that we don't propose to have a growing equalisation reserve through the LTP. The mechanism, or the cosmetic mechanism that David talked about, was to allow the auditors to look at the process that we've done, raising revenue and then spending on activities and having a balance within reserves. So the process for deliberations will determine what we do with those reserves. Our financial strategy does not build up the equalisation reserve. So it's in this place to show that substantial sum going into equalisation reserve, which ostensibly is the smoothing of the rates increase year on year, and the substantial sum that we have in there, the draft long-term plan to discuss with the auditors, and we've moved it to a more appropriate rate for council to decide in deliberations, like the media fund or any other one of reserve, for council to determine how that funding is used.
Thank you, thank you. Interesting.
Anything else, Anything else, councillors? Otherwise, it's been moved by Mr. Love, seconded by Mr. Crosby. Christian?
Yes, sure. Just a question. You raised the Untitled Chapter Lake Strategy Group as part of your commentary. I was at a meeting just the other day with Lyle and Kevin Winters. And the issue was raised about the deed fund for $72 million and the split between Regional Council and Callaway Lake and also Lakes Council, and the potential shortfall of around $7 million, given things that have happened over the last 15 years.
Councillor,
and the delays.
Councillor White, are you happy for the contingent discussion and confidential?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Neese.
Just, are we addressing the health and safety report at this point? Just on page, whatever it is, page 28 of the Arataki report, we've got an increase in injuries for December. And I find it interesting that we had more injuries in July and December and very few near misses. So is that just a reporting issue, or is it actually a real phenomenon that in fact people were just more accident prone, and the accidents actually happened in July and December as opposed to having a few more near misses? Can we comment on that?
Yes, through you, Chair, we can bring a more comprehensive report back. One of the things that we do find in December is with the Summer Mahi program, we do have a number of sprains and strains by some of the students out in the field. So I did notice that some bee stings, etc. The other thing that's going on is we report all the COVID testing through our health and safety vault system as well. So you will see those coming through. But we can provide a more detailed breakdown for you. There is quite a trend between COVID lockdowns and COVID testing. So we're very pleased that our staff are taking the opportunity to get tested if they're all concerned about their health.
So are they near misses, are they?
Yes, through.
Oh, I see. The other thing was I know we have an amputation in our reporting. So what was amputated and why?
If I recall rightly, can I follow up on that? It was a finger with, yes, a finger, and it was a marine, it was an accident on a boat with the bringing in the boat.
Okay, councillors, we have the Arataki Turua report has been moved. Councillor Love, seconded Councillor Crosby. No further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Councillors, do you want to crack on or do you want to break?
Crack on.
Break?
Right.
Okay, we're adjourned for 20 minutes for lunch. Thank you.
Sorry, Paul.
Convene, I'll move that we go into confidential. Second, Councillor Rose, all in favour say aye. Against, carried. Minutes of the 17th on the agenda. None? Thank you, councillors. I will adjourn the meeting until 8 AM on Thursday for adoption of the LTP consultation document. Thank you.
So close our meetings.
Yes. Thank you.
Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tātou wari ki a Ukraiti. Me te aro o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake. Amen.
Amen. Right.